All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. It looks like we're 101 strong together here to learn and grow this evening. We are here to present Indigenous perspectives on education. So thank you for joining us. My name is Maggie Peters. I'll be your facilitator this evening. I am Paula and Karuk. I'm an educator and coach at the Klamath Trinity Joint Unified School District, and I have had the honor to join in the Equity Leadership Committee at HCOE. I just wanted to welcome you and model, some good practices in integrating the local languages into your curriculum. It's there. All of these links in this slide deck that will be provided for you connect you to the databases that are already existing online. You can go ahead and link them, download the audio files, upload them into your Google Classrooms, your Google Docs, your slide decks, whatever it is that you're sharing with your students to bring in some local languages. We can go ahead and model the how that works real quick if you would like, and I'll be quiet.
Hail. Ayuki.
Hello. Hot what low. Hot what low.
Ayuki.
Awesome. Just want to take a moment for you guys to engage with the QR code. If you haven't played with QR codes before, you can put your smartphone into camera mode and go ahead and take like a picture, I guess, if you will, of the QR code, and it'll take you to the website so that you can discover the land, the Indigenous peoples that occupy the land that you are currently inhabiting. We always begin our conferences or our equity discussions with a land acknowledgement. So go ahead and if you would like to engage in the chat and say the Indigenous group of the land that you occupy and give them some gratitude, some thank you, as we know that we are currently on unceded territories.
Thank you, we are people.
I'm going to go ahead and put, yes, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and put a link to our resource and interactive page in the chat so you guys can grab it there. But let me see if I paste it. Copy, paste, there we go. We have created several different ways for you to engage in tonight's discussion. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide. I might have a little bit of delay. I'm joining you from Willow Creek. You can listen and reflect this evening. You can also use the Zoom features, the chat and the Q&A. I don't know if we have a Q&A tonight, but you can use the chat. We've created a Jamboard for each of the presenters for you to provide some direct feedback as they go through the slides. You will have QR codes to join that person's Jamboard. You can also put a question or a comment for each presenter using the sticky notes there. We also want to engage you in doing a Slido word cloud. As you are listening to the presenters, something might just really touch you deeply, resonated with you or inspired you. And we'd like for you to enter one word at a time into the Slido word cloud. And I will also put a link to that in the chat if you wanted to open it up on your computer. And there's also going to be a QR code to join the Slido on each page. Can you go ahead and go to the next slide? So we have an amazing lineup of knowledgeable educators and Indigenous people who are working with Indigenous peoples for you tonight. When I think about times that I have learned some of the biggest lessons, it's been, in between ceremonial rounds, like at brush dance, or, in the kitchens, and we're around a fire, right? And so there's something about being around a fire and really listening attentively to the words that are spoken. And so I want to invite each of you to gather around the fire this evening with an open heart and open ears, and be willing to grow and to learn and to really take everything in. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Because we have so many presenters, I'm just going to get us started with our first presenter, Chris Peters. He is Pulakla and Karuk. He's also my father. He's the director and founder of Red Deer Consulting, and also supports 7th generation for Indigenous peoples. You can use the QR code here, as you can see, to join in the Slido, or use the QR code to join in his Jamboard. All right, go ahead and take it away.
Good. Hey, can you remove the page? And I've got some notes on my my page already. Ah, they disappeared.
Oh, I'm sorry. I stopped sharing. I misunderstood.
Okay.
I'll do that again.
My name is Chris Peters. I am the president of the 7th Generation Fund for Indigenous Peoples, and I'm the founder of Red Deer Consulting. I've been with 7th Generation Fund for 33 years. It's a Native foundation working out of here, was working out of Hoopa for a long period of time. You know, I'm here today to speak with you briefly about Indian education. I don't know how do we remove the picture here of me and put my original screen back up.
I think that she has to stop sharing, or maybe you can split your screen, Dad, so that you can see not just the Zoom, but also, or you could go into view and say exit full screen, maybe?
Let me try that.
Because I think you tried that. If you exit the full screen, then you might be able to see other documents that are on your computer.
Yeah, I'm not too sure, but let me look at this for a minute. You know, there is for the past 30 years we've been dealing with the United Nations and many of the nation states that encompass the United Nations, and we've been in battles over the concept of an S in peoples, because Native peoples are not the same. We're not the same as any other ethnic citizen of any nation state. We have a political relationship. That political relationship has some sovereign powers, some sovereign abilities. And throughout the world, you know, we have been struggling for a period of time inserting the word S to peoples. And it is of concern to me when when there's an attempt to lump us together with issues of ethnic citizens, if you will. And it comes up around issues of people of color, you know, and this kind of focuses in on a concept that combines us together with other ethnic populations. We are not. Issues of people of color because of concern. Issues recently, the issue of BIPOC is of concern because it attempts to lump us together with other ethnic populations in the United States. We have very different histories, very different backgrounds. We have very different epistemologies and a very different political relationship with the United States. We are sovereign nations. And without going into too much detail, let me set that aside just for a few seconds. And let's talk about the concept of sovereignty. You know, and the concept of sovereignty is often defined by the United States government as the supreme power or authority. It speaks of jurisdiction, it speaks of rule, it speaks of hegemony, and it is defined as domination and control, the authority of a nation state or a tribal government to govern itself or a nation state or a tribal government. Sovereignty is defined and exercised by many tribal nations throughout the United States. Within this region, the school district, we have about 8 distinct sovereign nations, separate political entities that are very different than an ethnic group of people. And let's talk about the concept of sovereignty. It's a fundamental responsibility that we contend that each Native nation has in rethinking that word, sovereignty, to redefine it and to assert its own definition of the word, to make it our word, if you will. Let me suggest a new understanding of the concept of sovereignty. Sovereignty is defined as a spiritual word. It is the spiritual energy that binds us together as a specific unit, specific nation of peoples, Yuroks, Lakota, Hopi, Zuni. In Yurok language, we might refer to the concept of sovereignty as Ila-Lekwisha. It's a very sacred word meaning the energy that surrounds us all, that pulls us together. Sovereignty defined as a spiritual connectedness that holds us together as a unique paradigm of peoples and holds us together as a distinct worldview. It embraces customs, traditions, language, lifeways, and specific genetic compositions, or DNA, if you will. It's a specific archetype. Then over many generations of time, there has evolved a personality type that is Yurok, that is Hupa, that is Pomo, that is Karuk. We're not all the same. We're not just Indians out there, and we need to be treated as distinct nations of people. We each hold a unique spiritual sovereignty, a deep organic process or function that is rooted within our physiology, our psychological being or DNA. It has evolved from a specific place on Earth, our homelands, and defines who we are as a unique tribal group of people. It grows from our epistemology, our traditional values, our cosmology, and is expressed in our philosophy and realized every year in our ceremonies and in our earth-based spiritual understandings, our earth-based spirituality. It is our paradigm, our worldview, and makes up the very core of our tribal sovereignty. As teachers of our kids, you have a tremendous responsibility of preparing Native students to understand all of this concept of sovereignty, to understand it well enough to prepare them to be good ancestors for generations to come. If you don't understand that, then I encourage you to find out what sovereignty is and how we make it real and how it is expressed. The responsibilities of Native peoples to provide this education to our kids has been disrupted, has been skewed by the American society. And the process of education is left up to teachers, educators. And I contend that it is now your responsibility to be familiar not only with natives in general, but real specific cosmology, real specific epistemology of local tribes, to understand their ceremonies, to understand who they are as peoples. And only that way can you prepare our kids to be good ancestors. So I'll leave it there, and we can move on to the next presenter.
Thank you, Chris. It's so weird calling my dad Chris, but thank you, Chris, for joining us tonight and sharing that. I just need a moment to take it in. I see some of you guys have joined on the Jamboard, and I appreciate for the interactions that are taking place there. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be looking for them. And I would like to welcome our next presenter, Dr. Kishan Lara-Cooper. She's Europe, Hupa, and Karuk. She is currently working at as the Child Development Department Chair and Professor at Humboldt State University. And she is the author or co-author of the ChemTem book that is, I think, linked into your resource page if you're interested in picking that up. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Kishan. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you remove the slide, please? Wonderful. Ayakui, Kishan, Nawalet, Kunepsech, Nakuchas, Anachen, Kinau, Nipsech, York, Off, Necheka, Hupa, Otwen, Chapek, Esi Met Dildin, Esi Chimikani Nach, Mewachok. Good evening. I'm happy to be here with all of you. My name is Kishan, as named by my grandmother after the summer. I'm Hupa, Yurak, and Karuk. I'm also professor and chair of child development at Humboldt State University. This is a really exciting panel tonight. We have people from various different backgrounds, but we're all Indigenous peoples from the local community. So this is really a treasure for everyone that's here, and it's a treasure for me to be a part of this panel tonight. We're going to be sharing some things from a very different perspective, from a very different lens, and introducing some new language that you might have heard before, but hearing it from an Indigenous perspective in a way that is more of a reflection of our own beliefs. Something to really think about is that the educational system, like all institutions, have a genetic pool, a historical framework, a legacy, a social and cultural construct that were designed to benefit very specific groups of people. And when these institutions were developed and when they were created, was a time when Indigenous peoples here locally were going through genocide, attempted extermination of Indigenous peoples, when Indigenous peoples, children were being kidnapped and taken from their homes and put into boarding schools, during a period where Indigenous peoples were part of slavery here locally. So institutions that are still ongoing today were developed during a period of time when Indigenous peoples were not citizens of the United States, nor were they considered even human beings. And that's important to understand, because now when we're looking at the educational system in this particular discussion, we're talking about how do we create space for Indigenous peoples? How do we make it equitable? How do we support Indigenous children? And the first thing that we need to think about in this process is how have we shifted the paradigm of education? And thinking about that education was created to assimilate Indigenous peoples. It was created, when we talk about kill the Indian, save the man, it was created to strip a human being of all their identity, of what makes them human. It was an attempt to do that through the educational system. Part of this policy in the schools was to remove children as far away from their parents, because parents, families, and communities were seen as detrimental to the civilization process. So when we begin this discussion, it's important to really think about how have we deconstructed this institution? How have we played a role in making change to create spaces now for parents, to nurture spaces that acknowledge Indigenous identity? And most importantly, it's important to think about how have we as individuals perpetuated this institution? How have we as individuals benefited from this institution? Sometimes when we benefit, without knowing, we continue to protect the institution in the manner that it is. So these are some things to think about when we talk about institutional frameworks, when we talk about education, and we talk about equity. Because this word equity is a really important word that has so much research and so much information that's connected to it. And what it really speaks to is providing supports so that people from different levels and different experiences and backgrounds have an equitable support system to reach the same end goal. But we have to understand is when we speak of these end goals, we also are speaking to it from a very specific context. Sometimes the end goal for one may be different than the end goal for another. So I want to share a little bit with you about some research that I did when I was working on my dissertation that some of the people that are here on this panel were part of. And the question was, how do we as a community perceive a child as being gifted? So we know in the state of California, we look at giftedness as the top 1% of standardized test scores. Also, a teacher can deem a child gifted, and oftentimes they're deemed gifted based off of their artistic ability, their writing ability, etc. But from an Indigenous perspective, in the local community and looking at Hupa, Yurok, Karut, Wiyat, Talawa people, what do we see as being gifted? What are the most important things to teach to our children? And when we think about this, what are the core values and beliefs that we want our children to have? These are the core values, beliefs, the stories, the history, the songs, the culture, the language that are a part of a child when they enter the school system. So from a developmental perspective, we know that within the first 5 years of a child's life is when the child develops their self-concept, who they are. So what are Indigenous children coming to school with? What have they already been exposed to, and what makes up this core of who they are? So if you can please share the next slide. So in looking at this, study, this was kind of the result of the study. And I wanted to share a little with you about this, and please don't copy or reproduce this because it takes a lot of explanation with it. But in looking at 350 people in interviews and talking to them about what are the 5 most important things that you see as giftedness, what is it that you would like to teach to your children? These are the things that came out, and these are the things we're going to be highlighting in the panel tonight. As one of the first is relationships. Relationships with the human realm, natural realm, and spiritual realm. Relationships with the community, with elders, with family, including extended families, such as spiritual families. Understanding of self is real important. Relationships with the natural environment and looking at prayer sites, wildlife, the natural environment, our homeland. When we speak of homeland in Hupa, we say, Wichwo ayaden, Wichwin ayaden. My mother's mothers walked here before me. My mother's fathers walked here before me. It's critical when you think of Indigenous people in this area have been here since the beginning of time. We have always been here in our oral history, in our creation stories. We've always been here for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But even if you're looking towards scientific evidence, Indigenous peoples have been in this area carbon dated scientifically 12,000 years. So for 12,000 years, my mother's mothers have walked here before me. It's more than just an understanding of love for a place, it's being of a place. This understanding of this connection to homeland is considered a gift. It's part of giftedness. That's what people want their children to know. Connections to ceremonial sites, gathering sites, relationships with the spiritual realm. That means understanding our creation and looking at our creation stories. And one important piece is many Indigenous peoples don't have just one creator, but many creators that are a part of our histories. Connection with ceremony, songs having their own spiritual life, regalia having its own spiritual life. Our ancestors, Many of our people believe that when we pass, we still stay here in this space. That's part of our accountability to these homelands and caretaking the lands, is that we never leave. We never relocate. This is where our people continue to be even after that time of death. And that's important in looking at connection to place. Regalia having its own spiritual life. And when we understand that it has its own spiritual life, then others can understand the significance of why it's so hurtful to see regalia in museums and places like this. Values. People, community members talked about how important it is to teach discipline. Those that have a good, kind heart, compassion, patience, gratitude, generosity. When you make your first basket, you gift that to someone. When you catch fish, you take it to your elders to share. Your sincerity. Cultural skills such as hunting, fishing, basket making, gathering, traditional games, being a good listener. Sometimes there's a focus in school systems on being a good talker, but being a good listener and observing is also an important skill. So as you listen to the presentation tonight, what's so important to understand is while we may be exposed to continuing social indicators of Indigenous peoples, and while we may constantly hear of the 500% rate of alcoholism compared to any other group, or we hear of the 10 times the rate of suicide of any group, the highest rates of violence, 79% of deaths of Indigenous peoples between 17 and 21, when we hear that 1 in 3 Indigenous women are sexually violated, 1 in 7 go into human trafficking. When we hear these types of numbers, sometimes we create this image of Indigenous people, if not in the past or non-existent, but as a problem, as a deficit. Remember this diagram and how we see our own people, our end goal, Indigenous communities, the end goal, values, cultural skills, these relationships. And when our people are assessed on what our personal goals are, you'll see that we are not only surviving, but that we are flourishing, that we are doing very well in our community, that there is a beauty of our people that sometimes the institution is not exposed to, because the institution was created to not see the beauty within. Wakta.
Thank you so much, Kishan. I almost have a lump in my throat. There was so much there that I'm still taking in. Thank you so much. Our next presenter this evening is Margot Robbins. I have the honor of working with Margot at the Klamath Trinity Joint Unified School District. She is a tremendous resource to all of our educators in our district and in our county, in our area. Without further ado, Margot, go ahead and take the mic.
Hello, Maggie. Ayakui, Neknel Margot Robbins, Keechnak, Indian Education Director for the Klamath Trinity School District, Mate Wamechak, the traditional village of Morek. Could I share my screen, please? So this evening, I would like to talk a little bit about the trauma of our past and how it has affected the students and families that we work with today in our classrooms. You'll see here on the upper left a picture of the boarding school with the young women ironing clothes. So the boarding schools were set up to not only erase our identity as Native people, but to turn us into like servants for the non-Native people. Native people were given a one-way ticket to the boarding schools, and that was that. That's where they stayed. In the summertime, they were farmed out to rich people to act as maids, as cooks, as nannies. And when you look at this picture, you can tell that this is a very old picture, but that history is not so far away. My mother went to a boarding school. She was born in 1918. She did not become a citizen of the United States until she was 6 years old. So she was part of this border school upbringing where they were forbidden to speak their language. They were more of a militarized system of shaping kids into what they wanted them to be, and what they wanted them to be was white. In the lower part of the screen, you will see people waiting outside of the Fort Gaston, and they're waiting for rations. When the reservations were created and the children were taken away and the people were made dependent on the government for their food. They weren't allowed to go off the reservation to gather acorns or to hunt for their families. They were made dependent on the government for their very sustenance, their very survival. And if they did not give up their kids to be taken away to boarding school, their rations were taken away. So basically they were starved out until such time as they would comply or not. So this is the reality of our past. And this is where our students and families that we serve in our schools have in our past. I'm sure many of you have heard of epigenetics. It is the layer on historic past. As Native people, this is the trauma that we hold. It has come down through the generations, and in our schools today, we will see it in the form of low-income families, many living on welfare. We see it in the rate of drugs and alcohol that we have in our schools. We see it in lack of parenting skills that comes down through the generations. I helped raise a child that her mother didn't really have any parenting skills, and her mother didn't either, and her mother didn't either. And that went back to this boarding school generation where they didn't know what it meant to be loved and cuddled and taken care of in a caring way. And so when they left the boarding schools as adults and had children, they didn't take those skills with them. Some people were fortunate and they were able to overcome that. So I'm not saying that all Native parents are bad parents. That is definitely not so. But there is that piece that affects many of our families. The trauma of our past, our genocidal past, has, I believe, resulted in many of our families being affected by drugs and alcohol, because with that genocide came alcohol as well. And when you experience the things that our ancestors experienced, you want to forget. You want to forget. And alcohol was a way to do that, at least temporarily. And we had no resistance against alcohol. So many people became alcoholics, and alcohol is something that again comes down through the generations. So this is what we are dealing with in our families that we serve in our schools. And I don't share this information, and so that we're looking at our kids and thinking, oh, poor things, you know, they have all this terrible history behind them. We should pamper them into helplessness. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is to be aware of why our people are where we're at today. And what the boarding schools tried to destroy, our identity as Indian people, they were not successful. They were to some degree, but we're still here. We still have our language. We still practice our cultural lifeways. My slide doesn't seem to be changing.
We are seeing
Gosh,
a
I don't wanna
little,
be stuck.
we're seeing a little thing on over the top. And I don't know if you need to close that before you can advance your slide. I'm not sure.
Oh, here. All right. You see in the new slide now?
Yes.
Okay. So what the boarding schools tried to take away, we can help to restore in our schools. We have students 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. And in that time, we can help students to understand where they come from. We can help reestablish those ties to the land and the spirits of the land. And we can strengthen their understanding of our cultural practices through experiential learning. Our program has developed the Indian land tenure curriculum. Maggie was part of that curriculum development effort, and it is for kindergarten through 12th grade and includes lessons on traditional land values, land tenure history, contemporary land issues, and building a positive future in our communities. In every lesson, as we start to teach the students about our history, we have a few hundred years of the trauma I talked about, but we have thousands of years of wonderful things. And even before that, we have the history of the Wage spirit beings when they inhabited this earth and they created the world as we know it. And so we will always start our lessons out with one of those creation stories. Our lessons attempt to reconnect students to our cultural lifeways and teaching them about our traditional food sources and how to gather them. Basket weaving, medicine plants, ceremony within our own district, where 85% of our students are native from local tribes. We teach some about ceremony, not at large. And with those teachings comes information about the threats to these traditional lifeways. You see the guy up on the top left pulling a fish out of the net. And if we don't protect our water, we will no longer have pictures and experiences with this. So along with the knowledge and the experience of gathering things, and comes the responsibility to protect and restore our homelands. You see on the top right some young people, and they are protesting and trying to protect the water. Below that, you'll see Rick O'Rourke. He is a cultural consultant for the Indian Education Program, and he's talking to students on a field trip about cultural burns and how to keep a fire under control and what the benefits of fire are and the historical use of fire. This particular burn is for hazel sticks. On the left-hand side, you see students from Jack Norton, and they are preparing some basket weaving material. They're dyeing the fibers from the Woodwardia fern red. So these are things that we have incorporated into our current school system to help repair the damage of the past. Because although we hold the trauma in our DNA, we also hold the good stuff. And we have thousands and thousands of years of good things and memories and knowledge. And if we continue to build on those, they will rise to the top of that trauma, and that is what will fill our minds and our bodies and our experiences, our spirits.
Thank you so much, Margo.
I believe this was done by your students.
Sorry, I thought you were
Maggie,
done.
and
Yeah,
almost one or two more sentences. And this reflects the dual world that our students live in, and our need to address that dual world to really reinforce the value of who our students are and our responsibility to teach to the whole child. Thank you.
thank you so much, Margo. Our next presenter is also a member of the Klamath Trinity Joint Unified School District staff and a dear friend of mine. We've been on a learning journey together for several years. Tina West is joining us, and I will allow for her to also introduce herself. Go ahead, Ms. Tina.
Thanks, Maggie. Ayakui, Hey Young, Akwai, Quinamantha friends. I am really honored and so touched to be a part of this panel with these really amazing educators. My name is Tina West, and I am Stockbridge Munsee, Band of Mohican. I'm also English and Irish. And I wanna kind of dedicate my portion of the talk around self-awareness, being a learner and an ally. And like Maggie said, I teach at Hoopa Elementary School. I have 14 years of experience in the classroom as a classroom teacher. I've taught 7th grade, 6th, 4th, and I'm currently teaching 3rd grade at Hoopa Elementary School. And I'd like to take a moment for all of us to just do a little reflection about who we are as individuals and what our own identity markers are. You heard each of our speakers tonight introduce ourselves with kind of like our Indigenous background and our job titles and those kinds of things. So Stacy, if you could advance to the next slide. I'd like to ask folks to just do a simple reflection about your own self and to take in some identity markers and to delineate who you are and what you bring to either your classroom or to your interaction with Indian education. And really being clear about who you are as a person and having that really rooted in your own self-awareness is really powerful when in your stance of being an ally to Indigenous peoples. And for some of us, it's really clear. We know exactly, you know, what identity markers are there for us, and we're really rooted in a strong sense of who we are. And then for some people, I imagine there might be some insecurities or some longings or desires to have a strong connection to who we are. And I think that is true for our young people too. This slide and some resources associated with it are going to be available in the handout and the link. So at this time, Stacy, if you could please stop sharing, that'd be great. Like I said, I've taught at Hoopa Elementary School. Our students are about 90% American Indian, predominantly from the local tribes. But that same sense of identity within our students here is true. Some of our students come with a really strong sense of who they are and cultural knowledge. And some of our students haven't had as much opportunity to make a connection with their cultural identity. And so recognizing that our students have a whole spectrum of where they come from is really important. And keeping in mind our own identity, I think, is really powerful and important because our identity shapes our whole world view, how we see things, our perception of power, our perception of values, what we think are important, is really important. And I feel like at my years of teaching in the classroom, my most powerful and meaningful experiences have happened when I've had a really strong relationship with my students. when I have built a community and a family of where people can feel honored and heard, and it's safe to take risks, to try something new, to be more exploratory in their creativity, or take a risk with their growth mindset to learn something new. So I would really challenge all of the educators out there to really be clear about who you are and be authentic in building your relationships with your students, and coming at that with curiosity. You know, being open to who they are and the knowledge that they bring into the classroom. I have had some colleagues in the past say, you know, something along the lines of, well, my kids don't have to like me, they just have to learn from me. And I would really challenge that. I think our students really have to have some level of connection before they're going to learn from us. And it's powerful in our relationship. It's paramount. And I guess my previous panelists have really pointed out that our school system has really systematically worked to erase indigeneity and our viewpoint. You know, we talked about, you know, genocide and boarding school and forced sterilization and ICWA and stolen children. But we have to, as people who are in the classroom and in the school system, have to like systematically dismantle that narrative and bring in perspectives that validate and honor our students. I think it's really important to connect with the students that are in your class individually and ask them, like, what would you like to be called, right? Like some students, you know, some people identify as American Indian, some people are offended when you call them that, right? And so it's important to really connect with individually. Students, in the most cases, it's appropriate to call them by their tribal affiliation. So making sure that we honor them as who they are and how they want to be seen and heard, and keeping this identity in ourselves. We want to make sure that we are representing and bringing in the underrepresented or missing dialogue, right? Like whenever representation matters, whenever you share a lesson, make sure that you're pointing out what point of view it's coming from, and then offer up whose point of view is missing in this lesson, right? So that, and what would that voice look like? How could that be heard? And, you know, recognize that there are going to be potential triggers for our students, right? They're going to respond when we talk about Columbus or missions, right? And we have an obligation as teachers and educators to be aware of our own social emotional learning. Our self-regulation needs to come into play, because if our students pop off, push books away, say this is stupid, right? We have to recognize that that's a fight response. Or if they put their head down and pull their hoods up, you know, that's a flight response. And we have to have the social emotional awareness and understanding to be curious and to activate our compassion and to say, hey, what's happening for them? Or, you know, what happened to them? So, and they might not have the skill or maturity to say, hey, you know, I'm feeling erased, or I'm feeling, you know, disrespected by that lesson. And so we, as the mature, self-regulated educator, have to activate our curiosity and go in as an ally and make sure that we're presenting a balanced, represented curriculum for our Indigenous students. And so in closing, Stacy, could you just put up the next slide for us, please? And so these are just kind of my little takeaways that I hope that as educators that you will take into and really incorporate into your work. You know, be self-aware of your own worldview and your power dynamics. Check and recheck your own biases and actively work to dismantle them. Relationship is foundational, and we have to prioritize connection. Our children come into our classrooms with cultural knowledge and responsibilities. And I forgot to say this, I just real quickly, if your student comes to you saying, I need to go on independent studies so I can fulfill my obligation and my responsibility to my tribal ceremonies, allow that to happen without piling them up with a whole stack of independent study work, and trust that the knowledge and the education that they're getting is just what they need. Include missing or underrepresented points of views. Make sure that you are regulated and be a learner. Activate your compassion and be an ally. Thank you very much, friends. I appreciate you.
Thank you for that reminder, Ms. Tina, to really be checking in with who we are and what we bring into our classrooms. I appreciate that. Our next presenter is also an educator, a local educator. His name is Keoki Burbank, and he is currently working at the Northern Humboldt School District at McKinleyville High School, where he's serving as an Indian education site lead and coach. Keoki, passing the mic.
Thank you. First off, I just want to let everybody know I am a guest here. My people originally come from Okinawa in Japan and Hawaii. I grew up in Wichpec and Hoopa. My wife and my family are all native, but I am a guest here. So I want to make sure that I can share my screen. Let's see, desktop. Oh, right there. Cool. So first I got to give a shout out to my wife. She helped me make this amazing slide. I wish I could take credit for it, but she's got the skills. So, you know, a couple of the people that I really love to learn from is Jeff Duncan Andrande. And he says everything about school needs to be therapeutic from the time you walk in to the time you leave for every person who comes into the school. And also Dr. Virgil Moorhead Jr., he says school needs to be medicine for our students. And so at Northern Humboldt and McKinleyville High School, this is just some of the ways that we try to fulfill that, and we try to make school be medicine at our campus. Let's see. Okay, so first we're lucky to partner with Blue Lake Rancheria Pathmakers program, and this is let's see. We got to have our students learn some net making with Leo Knez. You can see students here are learning how to actually hang and create their own nets. They got to get down on the river and throw some nets, and that's Willard Carlson right there, Yurok elder who's teaching a lot. And then next we had Rachel Sunberg, one of with Pathmakers again, and teaching students how to make acorn soup. Acorn paddle making with Elmy Allen. And you can see in this top corner, that's all student paddles that they made. It's a once a week class. It lasts about 6 weeks after school. And same with our net making class. It went on for a while, and students got to take home nets and their paddles. And then the person Corby Skoglin, she has the same position of me over at Arcata High. Currently, she's teaching beading at Arcata High. We have a lot of students who are involved in that. I'm teaching fish, how to carve fish cooking sticks. That's my son right there. And soon we'll be able to start teaching students. We're going to be working with them individually, one-on-one, to teach us in a COVID safe way. This is McKinleyville High School Indian Education, or sorry, Native American Club, Success in Both Worlds. Dr. Lara-Cooper was in the very first Success in Both Worlds conference that was at the high school. And these are photos from our last two conferences. This is a completely student-led conference. They choose the theme. We actually have one coming up this year on April 7th, virtually, with the theme being Native Know-How. So the students do everything. They do the fundraising, they do pick the themes, pick the keynote speakers, either make the food or fundraise enough to have it catered, depends on how the students decide, but it's completely student-led by the Native American Club. And these are some of the club activities that we've had. This is for the Northern Humboldt District. We've gone on college tours, went up to Sume Village, help at UIHS Harvest Party, Indian taco sales. Let's see if I could go to the next slide. Sorry, my computer's slowing up on me. Oh, I think that's the end of it. So that's why, sorry. Sorry, that's the first time I've shared my screen and there's a lot of people here. I show all of that to show the amazing ways, things that can be done. But here we are at a equity conference, and all of those are taking place from our partnerships with either local tribes such as Blue Lake Rancheria, Yurok Tribe, or other Native organizations like Warrior Institute and Two Feathers. And even with the Indian Education Title VI grant, which is a federal grant, that's Karen Skoglin working with 9 schools in our consortium to run around, collect data just to fund the position. Now, to me, if we are talking about real equity, those would be fully funded positions, because every time Karen's out trying to get money, trying to get paperwork done, that's less time she's spending with the kids. So I know at McKinleyville High in Northern Humboldt, it started off with American Indian Academy, which turned into a permanent Yurok language position. And so it can happen. I know it can. And if we are talking about equity, those are the things, to me, that's what would be equitable. The blueprints there, we're already doing some of it, but that's all funded through the hard work of our local Native partners. And so that's it for me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Keoki. And that's one of the things that I've also added to our resource page is for people to become active in the LCAP process in your districts, really be a strong voice and advocate for your Indigenous student populations, make sure that that funding is getting appropriated to do the work and continue to support Native voices on your campuses. Our next presenter is currently working at Two Feathers. She is the Native Connections Director, mental health therapist, and it is Miss Shoshoni Gensaw Hustler. She is Yurok, and I will go ahead and pass the mic. Thank you for joining us tonight, Shoshoni.
Thank you so much for having me, and it is a pleasure to talk about equity with this group. And I think first and foremost, thank you so much, Keoki, for bringing up the point of equity and really some of the points that I want to talk about when we're talking about social emotional learning and wellness in the schools and equity. Is that an equity training is necessary, but it's not sufficient. It can't be the only thing that we do. And equity or multicultural classes and programs can't be the sidebar elective. It needs to be within and throughout the whole entirety of the system. So whatever that looks like for you guys. Also, I'm going to be talking about social emotional learning and wellness. So I'd like to start off by saying that trauma-informed care, I'll be talking a little bit about that, but trauma-informed care is necessary. It's not sufficient in treating all of what our Native American students are. And also, I really want to talk about how important it is to be developing school-based mental health systems, and also school-based mental health systems are necessary. They're not sufficient in treating all youth in the care in which they decide what they need and what they deserve. So I just want to say that first and foremost, and then kind of get into some of the points. I feel like I can't really talk about social emotional learning without talking a little bit about the Olympic system. And I know that most of you probably have some background in the limbic system and kids when they're highly emotional or we're seeing behaviors in the classroom that we may label as disruptive. That comes when a child is actively in their limbic system, which is part of the medial temporal lobe. And that means that part of the brain controls behaviors and emotions. So we know that when cortisol is released into that section of the brain, that cortisol takes 15 minutes to disperse out of our system. So for at least 15 minutes, our youth and our adolescents, our children are not accessing or having access to their prefrontal cortex, which controls our higher level functioning and thinking. And so that's why social emotional learning has been kind of at the forefront of what we've been talking about within the school districts as far as what we're seeing in the classroom and how we go about our day. So it is important to acknowledge that process. I also think that it's important to talk about how it used to be where kids were labeled as bad kids, that they were the disruptive kids, and they were either needed to be removed or somehow they needed to fix that behavior. And I think we've come a long way with trauma-informed care in saying it's not the kids, it's what happened to them, and that we should be asking about what is going on with them in their environments and in their surroundings, and taking into account epigenetics and all of those multiple facets that go into our child's life and that in which we see in the school system. So trauma-informed movement, for those of you who are newly familiar with, it's a holistic approach to treating trauma. But as Dr. Sean Ginwright pointed out, he's quoted saying, "It's akin to saying that you are the worst thing that has happened to you." So in other words, you are your trauma, and not that that's what the expectation was for trauma-informed care. I think that that's the byproduct, right? Is that's the underlying message and the narrative in which that can be highlighted when we focus solely on trauma. So some of the limits to trauma-informed care are that it can be seen as the trauma being an individual issue that needs to be treated with that individual child. So it's not looking at social constructs and context. Also, it doesn't look at the systemic causes of trauma and in neighborhoods and in communities to dissipate some of that trauma. It also runs the risk of pathologizing. So although there are some very great progress made in the trauma-informed care movement, it is a necessary part to treating some of our students. It's not sufficient in seeing a holistic, well child for the fact that each and every child should be well because they exist, right? So regardless of race, regardless of circumstance, each and every child deserves that. And also I think that speaks to Dr. Kishan Lara's point in giftedness. What are the strengths? And so if we're going beyond trauma-informed care, what's the next step, right? And so I think that the next step is a wellness model. Wellness being a holistic way of treating and assessing and offering resources and services to our students. That it's strength-based. So we're looking at those giftedness and we're broadening that definition. We're broadening how we see our students as they enter our classrooms. We are providing those alternative futures, right? So we're highlighting Native authors and actors and Native psychologists and Native scientists and all of these things, so that that they see someone like them, like where is their identity within your school system. And it also it centers culture into the discussion and into how we are structuring the school. It would center culture within that system. So if we're looking at what our schools should be focusing on, right now they're developing. So we should be focusing on their development and what that looks like, right? So I think this goes with some of what the other speakers were talking about in really understanding that deep connection and having a deep connection with your students. That should first and foremost be where we enter our classroom. How are you relating to that student? How are you honoring them and making them feel valid and seen and acknowledged by you and appreciated by you? That's a relationality piece. So I would say for a deep connection first, and then universality, bringing that connection out to others, being able to deeply think, critically think about data and information, so that they can have informed decisions and also develop their youth voice. I think that's important in having our students feel like they have the ability to take up space in a classroom. And it helps with their them developing identity, and then you build your curriculum around that strong base. Thank you.
Thank you, Shoshoni. That was amazing. And I know that your talk is going to definitely do a nice lead into our next presenter. Go ahead and change the slide. Our next presenter, his name is David Husser. He's Humboldt and UROC. He's also working with the amazing staff at Two Feathers. He is the SUD counselor and prevention coordinator. Please welcome David Husser.
Hey, young, HCOE, my brothers and sisters. I'm very, very proud to be here. As she said, I'm Humboldt, UROC. I come from Takmadildan and Village of Stragon. I wanted to talk a little bit about cultural credits. Recently, we've helped some students gain cultural credits at this time with COVID. It's about like honoring some of the skills that they already have and highlighting those skills. I think it's really important for the youth in our school system to have that piece within the system to honor them for who they really are, and taking, and I guess creating equity within the system as well. I do have a video. I created a video, and I do want to share that with you. It's titled "Recognizing the Power of Indigenous Knowledge." So I do want to share that now. I do want to give a little spiel I got afterwards. You guys could share that. All right, so some of those, a lot of those photos are taken with our youth ambassadors. We've been doing a lot of cultural things with them to try to like, I guess, combat what's going on right now here in the world, I guess you'd say. And in doing so, we've gotten students that attend our local schools. We got them credits for some of the things that they have really good skills in. So I thought that was really important. So I wanted to do a presentation on that. And I think it's vital that they honor that within our systems that our kids go to. So in these cultural actions, this embodies wellness, getting youth out in the wilderness, doing hard labor, physical ed. It kind of like crosses over with physical ed, helps with mental health. What I like to call is like nature therapy. So with nature therapy, you're getting youth out doing stuff, which right now is vital, because if you know youth, they're on their systems, they're on game systems all the time. And you know, this is a good way for them to like get some really good mental health. So we do a lot of things. We do hiking, we do cutting wood, we do obviously running on the beach for eels. And all these cultural actions, they foster like altruism, and they help build identity, because that builds identity by providing for, you know, elders, other people. So I wanted to talk also about the crossover and kind of like how it would apply to the system that is right now. And I know that there's already a great Indian education program, and I just want to like build on top of that too as well, right? Because that happens within the school environment, but I want to get it to be, you know, also outside of that, right? Not just when you go to school, right? It's going to be honored all the time. So I guess the crossover would be from cultural learning objectives, including engineering. As you'd seen with the biochar, we created a chamber, and then we started burning wood within side of the chamber. So that's like engineering, right? So that's helping build something, and you know, moving forward with like biochar for agriculture for gardens. And our plan was to just like do a big batch and then like give it out, right, for the next garden season. So that was the great idea, and they enjoyed it. They really loved that. You think about traditional foodways, those natural gardens, supporting that agriculture for our local people, and then also doing like a presentation on like all the traditional like foodways, like mushrooms, eels, deer meat, everything. And that's, you know, helping like rekindle or ignite whatever is within, right? Hitting those youth on a molecular level, that's just, you know, amazing, right? I think that's really vital to do so. And also getting them credit within the school system, honoring who they are as a person. I think it's really important. Also, the other ways that it kind of crosses over is like science. Science is a big one. You know, with biochar being the way it is, you got to do it just right, right? So that's another way. And then also the physical education, and then also getting youth into their own environment. I think that's very, very, very important. It also embodies like stewardship, being a good stewardship of the land, knowing, you know, certain habitats, where things grow, where to look for things, and then also honoring those things. Is very important. So I think that being a good stewardship of the land helps like embody these values that we bring those into ceremony. We bring these things with us as a person. And I think all of this teaches you how to be a good human being, how to be a good person, have a good heart, and do things in a good way. So I think that's really important for when we're talking about like these cultural credits being a part of the system. It needs to be present for us to get the best from the youth that they can give, right? Because they already have these skills. You know, all the kids that I work with, they have such great skills. They're teaching me things. And it's really important to highlight that when we talk about like changing the system for our own. And I think that's really important. I think with all these cultural actions being honored in the school system, it teaches Native youth values that we bring to ceremony on a deeper level. You know, we want, I guess, the best for our children. And I got one closing statement. I don't know how much time I got, but I wrote this down. I wanted to say it just right. So the reason this is so important for creating equity within the county is the simple fact that we all don't learn the same way. And ethnocentric education only values white knowledge, and it values a worldview and does not give space for any other worldviews. You see, and that's why it's so important for it to be, I guess, within the system, because it honors us for who we are. And that's what I got.
Thank you so much. Very, very powerful, great video. It's awesome to see the work that you're doing with the kiddos, you and Keoki both. Thank you for sharing those images. We do have one more presenter this evening, and I know I'm hoping that you guys have some time a little bit later to ask questions. I know that this is scheduled to go till 6:30, but I think that our presenters and panelists are willing to stay on for a couple more minutes if you wanted to talk to them directly. Our last, save the best for last, right, James? So our last presenter tonight is Mr. Gensaw, a Yurok language teacher at Eureka and the McKinleyville High Schools. Go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you for all those beautiful presentations, and I'm kind of gonna reiterate on some of those things there. But yeah, listening to last speaker David just really reminded me of when I first started teaching. I've been teaching now for 13 plus years, and I first started teaching at early college at the Redwoods High School down in Klamath on the reservation. And that, you know, that is very doable. We did that for 4 years. You know, kids were working on canoes, redwood canoes. They got credit for geometry. They got credit for, you know, math when they were working on drums and building things, or, you know, giving things out to elders, whether they're eels and things like that. Learning the science, or getting the science credit and stuff like that. And it just kind of reminded me of, that's what hooked me into learning, wanting to become a teacher. And so, you know, I encourage all of us to really focus and put more time and energy into that. It's a valuable resource that, you know, especially in the area that we live, you know, we don't live in a big urban area where we can't just go out to the woods. We can't, you know, the woods are right here, the rivers are right here. And so I take advantage of that. So appreciate you, David, for doing that. So if you want to take the screen off, now I think people have had time to look at the little barcodes already. So HCOE now James Gensaw Rekoya si sa asla si star when a mouth kicha ha komeka per where school like si o keta uwanu was school like McKinleyville High School. Next day what ki neka ki saga chipa. So my name is James Gensaw. I come from the villages of Rekoy, Sa'ash, and Starwin, and also a village on part Tolwa, come from a village of Yontake up near Kaupe, near Crescent City. I teach the Yurok language at Eureka High School and McKinleyville High School currently. And before that, I taught 4 years at the early college of Redwoods High School. I think I'm going on 9 years right now at Eureka High School. So woohoo. And then it's my first year with McKinleyville High School. So I'm really excited to do that. And usually I've done this presentation in the past, and it was like it varied from an hour to an hour and a half. So I'm giving you the really condensed milk, the commod version, I guess, of this presentation. And so I really kind of wanted to talk about, you know, like I think a lot of our previous presenters kind of hit on these points, you know, like we have a long history in this area. You know, We've been here for tens of thousands of years since the beginning of time. And the language has been here longer than us humans. Us Yurok people believe that the animals, before the animals spoke, it was their spiritual beings that put this earth into balance, and they put it here. And that's what it means. The word in Yurok, to speak the Yurok language, means I speak the language of the spirits, the spiritual beings. I speak that language. So, it doesn't belong to us humans. It was here way before us. And so we have that long history here. Then we also have that trauma that's happened in the last 160 plus years since the gold rush. And, I know not too many people hit on it a long ways, but I think it's really important and imperative that I kind of talk about that a little bit here. With the massacres that happened here, after Manifest Destiny worked their way across the United States and came here, there was no way we could push natives thousands of miles away, because there's that big blue thing out here called the Pacific Ocean, right? And so this area, the area that you guys teach in, has the worst massacres in U.S. history, and that's a lot. That's a lot of trauma. When we talk about, intentional things that were put in place to eradicate people, up with the Tolwas, 95% of them, of the the Tolwa people were exterminated, at that time. Where we here in Humboldt County with the Wiyot people, 95, 97%, right, were exterminated, here in the greater Humboldt County. And then, we go with the Cholula people, 99% of those people were exterminated up on Bald Hills. And so there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of, and that's what happens with language loss, right? You get loss of culture, loss of people, you get grief. And then we go into the boarding school system. And I don't know if it was Margo, or I think everyone kind of hit on a little bit when we talk about we're in this system. We're in this very old system. And with Native Americans, it started with boarding schools. And so there's still this, there's this negative energy that's attached to school. And all of us here we're a part of that, breaking that down, that negativity, and adding positive moments and memories, and instilling that in for our future and our kids. And so the boarding schools happen, and basically I say that's kidnapping for 50 years. They were kidnapping kids and forcing them to go as young as 4 years old to go to these boarding schools. And in the United States, the mortality rate was about 50% throughout the United States and Canada. And to let you guys know, like, my great grandma went, and 8 of her siblings went. There's 9 of them went to boarding school, and she was the only one that survived. So I'm lucky I'm here. And so, we filter kids in through this education system. They're kidnapped and put into this education system. And, it was intentional. This system was intentional to break down who we are, to break down the family systems, to break down our language and our culture, to eradicate it and to take it away. And, like we know in the 60s, there was a lot of things happened besides, the hippies and drugs and all the other stuff. We had all the civil and human rights movements that happened. And also that's when we started revitalizing the local cultures and languages. And Humboldt State, they had a program that came in to document and work with a lot of the local tribes, the Tolwa, the Wiyot, the Hoopa, the Karuk, the Yurok peoples, and really document the languages. And anyway, to fast forward, the Yurok tribe, we became an organized tribe in 1993. So I was 12 years old when the Yurok tribe became an organized government. And so that's not very long ago. And so, after 1993, 1998, 99, I think we got the first Yurok language classes. And I think they're up in Klamath Trinity School up at the Hoopa High School. So we started bringing back the language into the schools. And I think that's so powerful. And there's so much healing that goes to that, to be in an education system that wanted you to take away the language, to punish you, to abuse you for speaking a language. Now, how far we've come as a people and even as a system here. We're working within this educational system, how far it's come. It's ironic that we can use this tool to teach our children their language, to teach our children their education, and I pertain this to the health of the Indian people and the resilience of the Indian people and our environment even. Those dances, that have been going on for tens of thousands of years in this area. Those people, part of some of our ceremonies, we're praying for the present, we're praying for the future, and we're praying for our ancestors that came before us. So those people 30,000 years ago were praying for us. We're praying for these children that we're teaching now. And I think that's, I give a lot of that to our ancestors, of why we're here and why the educational system and why there's healing that's happened within our own selves and the system, how it's changed. And one day it's gonna be back in balance, right? And so teaching Yurok language at the high school level, you can't teach language without teaching culture, without teaching a worldview. And language is resilience. My Yurok language teachers that taught me, they're all passed away. All my teachers of the Yurok language work with about 10 fluent speakers who are no longer here. And it was resilience. It was these people that taught me that had their mouths washed out with a wire brush for speaking their language, that were beaten for speaking their language in the school systems. And they said, you know what? I'm going to keep this language and I'm going to pass it on. I'm going to teach someone else. And so that's resilience. Language is a resilience. And it's a powerful thing, and it's so powerful that they try to take it away from people, right? And so I know that language is healing, and it's working with our students here. And I kind of wanted to share, I asked this question a few years ago to some of the first language students that went through 4 years of Yurok language at the high school here. So I'm going to share some testimony from them, some testimony from myself of how the Yurok language or learning any Indigenous language in the schools is healing for Indigenous peoples. And so I'm going to share that with you. And let me open this document here. So I'm going to read from you to you their exact words. And so this first one I'm going to read is from a non-native student. And this is her words. So learning Yurok has given my life immense meaning. As a lover of languages and linguistics, I'm really glad I can learn and share an Indigenous or endangered language. I hope to help bring Yurok out of its endangered status into a daily life. It is my second language, so it taught me how to learn languages. And since it's so linguistically dissimilar to languages derived from Proto-Indo-European languages, I have confidence I didn't previously have before, that I can learn languages inside and outside of my native language family. This language class has taught me a lot about Yurok culture, Humboldt history, and the legacies of trauma and hatred, As a non-native person, I didn't know much about local native people before this class. I only knew Humboldt's white history. I never knew about generational trauma due to the fact that my family has quite a bit of it, but I never stopped and thought about the generational trauma that could be caused by racism, genocide, and discrimination. Like it has for many Native people and other minorities in America, I've also never realized that generational trauma that can be a direct sign of racism. By learning about the atrocities unlawfully committed against Native people, I've begun to feel that it is my job as a descendant of the oppressors to help heal wounds caused by oppression in whatever way I can. And I'm not going to read her whole thing here, but I'm going to include this one last thing. She also, as a person of mixed Scottish, Welsh, and Irish heritage, Yurok has taught me to learn and value languages and culture, including my own. It is particularly due to skills learned in Yurok class that I now know what my family's tartan looks like, and that I know how to clog dance in the Welsh style now, that I can cook and sing and tell stories of my culture, and that I know of the old legends and gods of my culture. And so I think that's really powerful to hear from a non-native student and their perspective and their journey in healing by taking an Indigenous class, a class that's not spoken by millions of speakers, right? You have Spanish, you have French, you have German. And this other last one I like to share really hits me hard. And I've seen this a lot with Native children and what learning their own Indigenous language in schools, how powerful that is. This student, she would ditch all of her other classes, and she took 2 years of Yurok, and then she was getting kicked out, suspended, getting in fights, calling teachers names, and she would ditch all of her classes, and she would always come to my class every day. She loved my class. Anyway, she got in trouble with the law and all these things, and her family had to send her away to like a boarding school type of school. And so anyway, she ended up getting on track, and then she could have graduated early. In her senior year, she came back to the high school just to take Yurok language. And she wrote me this letter. And so I wanted to share this piece with you. And I know I went past my time, but here. And so why is Yurok important to me? Learning Yurok has impacted my life by feeling more connected with my culture in a way it brought me back to reality and off drugs. Yurok has brought me back to the right path in life. It's taught me a lot about myself. I learned to be more self-aware and not to be so quick to judge others and be mad at them. And I think this is powerful. If we can reach out to one student every year, I know this impacts more students than that, but this is powerful. Having a class where you can see people and hear your people's stories, speak your own language, have people that look like you. I have other people that are may not be Yurok, but they may be Cherokee or Lakota or Navajo, but they take Yurok because they're like, hey, there's another Native person. There's another person that looks like me. And so I think that's important. Kids need to have that for healing. Say, hey, that's me. That's who I am. And so I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to share that with you because, we are a rare species. We're rare individuals. I think we're 1.6% of the United States population, and we're 0.0086% of the world's population. We're an ultra rare people. And, but why it's important here, especially in Humboldt County, we're about 14% of Humboldt's population. We go to Del Norte County, we're 24% of the population, almost a quarter. And so in this area, there's going to be Native people. You're going to have Native students, and you're going to have to work with us. And I appreciate you guys. and all the hard work and all the hard work that the school districts have made so far to do this, but we need more. We need more Native teachers. We need more Native classes, more Native history classes. And I'm going to end there. So walk cloud. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to give some last resources. So if you don't mind sharing the slides just one more, and then we can open it up for some Q&A if you're still with us. While the slide's coming up, or there it is, I just want to give a big shout out to HCOE and to the Meredith with the TK Equity, and I'm forgetting the title of her organization, Equity Alliance Group, for supporting our work tonight. I have a document that I've shared a couple of times in the chat, and I will grab it one more time. We don't want to give you all of this information without also connecting you to some more resources. And so there's a whole bunch of do nows in this document. It might feel a little bit overwhelming, but there's a lot of links there. And if you can integrate into your wellness practice just to continue to do this educational work and really do some reflection. Kishan Lara wants to close us out tonight before we share the Slido word cloud.
Thank you. Can you turn the slideshow off, please? Thank you. Just want to share the screen here and just bring you back to this chart again. Some of these things we've talked about this evening and looking at these relationships with the human, natural, spiritual realms, and drawing your attention that each of these aspects in this particular study and community concept is connected through language. And so language is such an integral part of worldview and perspective. So I want to draw your attention to that, and then also talk to you about next steps and thinking about the incorporation of language and culture. And you've heard testimony here about how critical language and culture is to a child's identity. And Tina had mentioned earlier that sometimes she's heard teachers share perspectives, saying that a student doesn't have to like me, but they have to learn from me. And I think we as human beings know through our own experiences how we learn. Do we learn in an environment where we feel like we're not wanted? Do we learn in an environment where we feel like it's a hostile environment? We know that human beings forget 70% of what they learn within the first hour. And the things that we remember and the things that we retain are the things that somehow resonate with us. And so it's the same for children. When children are learning, what resonates with them, the connections that they can make, are the things that they'll carry on with them. And so when we think about equity, which is the end goal, if our end goal is to ensure that the children that we're working with are active contributors to the world and making it a better place, then it is extremely important that children feel safe in a classroom and that yes, they do like you. And so in thinking about this and how we learn in our memory and our experiences, it's the places we felt safe, where we felt like we were treasured, where we really wanted to do our best. But knowing that children come to the classrooms with this treasured knowledge, and also thinking, though, about this institutional framework. So when we start thinking about integration of language and culture, there are some pieces of language and culture that do not belong in the classrooms. There are pieces of language and culture that belong within certain people within the community that not even other community members are aware of. So it's really important to understand that. Thinking about it from a student-centered approach. So during the boarding school era, Richard Henry Pratt, he was the first creator of boarding schools, 1879, where we talked about the philosophy, kill the Indian, save the man. After him came a superintendent, Estelle Real. During Richard Henry Pratt's time, children weren't allowed to wear regalia. They had their names changed. Their language couldn't be spoken. Everything cultural was stripped of them. When Estelle Real came into the picture, she said that Indigenous peoples can include language and culture into the school if it fits two protocols. The first is if it is for the economic development of the school. And the second is if it's for the entertainment of mainstream populations. And so children were allowed to make baskets if they sold them so that it would benefit the school. They were allowed to regalia and sing if it was for a play for the entertainment of mainstream population. So when we think about the integration of language and culture in schools, and when we think about how important it is for Indigenous peoples, we have to shift that paradigm. We have to deconstruct the institution that sees language and culture as entertainment and as an economic value or benefit for the institution. And we have to think about language and culture as part of a human being's identity and what helps them to heal and what helps them to carry the strength to continue this resilience that we have discussed tonight. So there's a lot more work to be done, and there's a lot more discovery and self-reflection and thinking about how can we actually be a part of this movement. And also in thinking about that is the first step is self-reflection. The second step is listening. We are in an action-oriented society where sometimes we feel empowered to make these immediate changes, but sometimes we need to step back and listen to the peoples and communities that we're working with. So walk thou, thank you. And thank you to all the panelists, this is wonderful.
All right, I see a lot of gratitude. I appreciate all the gratitude that I see in the chat. Is there anybody that has any questions? Great, thank you for sharing the Slido. And it's not too late. You can use that QR code now to enter in some final thoughts, a word that is really stuck with you throughout the presentation.
I just want to thank the Native community for welcoming me from a Native community somewhere south of the border into your all's community. Thank you.
Pete Wall, Rafi.
Hello, James. I love you, brother. Miss you.
Miss you too, brother.
See you soon.
Hey, Rafael.
Hey, Queen Margo. You're beautiful.
We never heard that laugh yet, Margo.
I'm silently laughing.
Yeah, baby. Yeah, baby. I missed that.
Get all the Aurorics together and you can just, they're just going off.
And if you cry, you're weak.
I'm hoping that as a follow-up, we can send an email that has our contact information. So I haven't really checked in with Miss Stacy to see how easy it is to get information to panelists, but we'll definitely send out the document for resources along with our contact information so that if you wanted to follow up with any of us individually, that is an option. All right, I don't see any questions. I feel like everybody's taken things in. I appreciate you coming tonight. Please do that or advocate for your Indigenous students. You know, one example of doing that is writing letters to your school boards, asking for them to set aside funding every single year to support cultural programs and language programs. You know, it's a blessing to have language teachers on staff at Klamath Trinity Joint Unified School District. It's a blessing that James is doing that work on the coast. I also want to say that you know, those positions need to be full-time. Those positions need to be, you know, have that equity, that money behind them to make sure that they are full-time teachers that have access to benefits and retirement. There's no reason to have anybody who's doing this work not have the same rights as all the other teachers.
Say, Dia.
Looking for questions. All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much. This is beautiful. We got to bring our community together and keep it together. It's tougher.